We good to go? Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. You've made it through Symposium Week. How are you feeling? I was about to. I'm like looking at all y'all, and y'all look like how I was feeling earlier this morning. Did some of y'all just roll in from out of bed? Yes. Yes. Okay. Okay. Let's shake it off a little bit. So we can wake up a little bit. Well, thank you all so much for being here. This is the final event for our symposium on social justice inclusion for this academic year. Today we have Shanae Watkins with us, and we are so excited to have Shanae. I am really excited for the conversation that we are going to be having today, but I just want to say a few things before we begin. I'm going to let Kirsten introduce Shanae, and then we'll get started. But I want you to keep in mind that on the stage are three Black African-American women from different backgrounds. So the things that we might talk about may feel very different than the experiences that all of you have sitting in the audiences. So I want you to be careful as you think about the things that we're talking about, even if you don't agree with the experiences, not to invalidate them simply because you cannot relate to them. That's a big thing for me. I want this to be a safe, comfortable space, but I also realize that some of the things that we're going to be talking about can be triggering. So as my usual plug to all of you, if at any point there's a conversation piece that makes you completely uncomfortable or you are not feeling comfortable anymore being in this space, please do not hesitate to step outside. I will exit the stage to meet you out there to find out if there's anything we can do to support you in the moment, okay? Nods of agreement. Awesome. So I'm going to pass the mic to Kirsten so she can introduce our guests.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. There's Miss Leori. I heard that. Okay. Shanae Watkins has reshaped the trajectory and ripped off each of the negative labels that society attempted to place on her. A failure, a reject, a violent criminal, all by the age of 11. While her painful but short past positioned her on a difficult, often solo course to navigate, the label that blared from headlines further pushed Shanae into a fight against odds that consumed her teen and young adult years. From one chaotic experience, being kidnapped, to another, a hit-and-run attempt around the age of 5, she evolved from a naturally curious, wise beyond her years, to a runner leaving home for weeks at a time, unsure of her place anywhere, so wanting to be everywhere. These choices, some hers, and some made naively and more often predatorily for her, accelerated her from a little girl to a preteen who fell into misleading hands, who took advantage of her desire to be free, that inevitably resulted in her freedom being taken away. Healing through hardship as a single mom, rejection and abuse from the world she desired to feel safe in as a woman, she is 100% invested in healing from what she now considers valuable lessons every single day. First introduced internationally in the cable documentary Girlhood, she has appeared on Oprah, Geraldo, The Montel Williams Show, and MSNBC. We're going to have to hear about Oprah. With regional appearances on panels speaking on the juvenile justice experience, childhood, and adult trauma. Today, Shanae is the proud, doting mom of 3 children, 1 son and 2 daughters, a business owner, customer service professional, and provider of service catering to femininity and adult health and wellness. Featured as a co-host to a podcast created to help women find clarity in love, life, and spiritual healing, and a published author to the 2022 electronic and hard copy long-awaited release From Girlhood to Womanhood. I'm going to pause here to say that there will be sales of the book after our talk. I've been reading it, I've been combing through it, and I highly recommend all of you to grab a copy. From girlhood to womanhood, she is a flower of feminine dynamic light with an infectious spirit that captivates hearts of all she meets. Despite her circumstances and despite the inner voice that sometimes spoke in unison of naysayers, Shanae refused to answer the name that those experiences and society tried to give her, no matter the experience that society wanted to use to define her. 20 years later, she is the rose that bloomed in darkness and uses her own light in a frank, unapologetic, good girlfriend way. She tells her story and her debut as an author in her book From Girlhood to Womanhood through profoundly professional words. Please join me in welcoming Shanae Watkins. Absolutely.
Thank you all. I'm really excited to be here.
So Shanae, where are you coming to us from?
We came from Baltimore. We drove in last night.
Oh.
Oh gosh. Okay. So to get here from Baltimore, like we have to go through like Delaware and Jersey, as well as like New York, Connecticut, and everything. I am a very anxious passenger. I am an anxious traveler. I probably had about 4 or 5 panic attacks. I cried a lot, but it was important for me to get here and see you guys today.
And what a blessing it is to have you here today. We are so excited to kick off this conversation.
Yes, and it's a bit different. I mean, like I was saying, I'm from the city. I've been born and raised in Baltimore, and so everything that I'm used to is city. So seeing the mountains and having to like drive through the mountains and you know, things being dark, it's like, oh my gosh, but it's a beautiful place.
Everything closing before
Yes.
like 10 o'clock, you know, that's another thing our students can relate to that frustration. No DoorDash.
Yes.
You know, Grubhub sometimes. We understand.
And listen, I grew up in the mountains, in the darkness, in the forest, and I clutch my purse and I run to the door every time it gets dark in these woods because it's scary. So to begin, we would love you to just kind of talk about girlhood from your own words. We'll start from the beginning and maybe work our way up.
So with girlhood, I was about maybe about 13. So I was 12 when I was arrested, but I was about 13 when I was walking around kind of like, it's kind of a compound type of a campus, and I saw these people with cameras, and they were following the boys. And I was like, well, what are you guys doing? I was very curious. And they said that they were doing a documentary on the boys and, you know, like some of their lives. And I said, well, you guys should come and film the girls, like see what we're about and everything. Not thinking that they were going to do anything with it, but they wound up coming over. They asked a few questions, and we began filming. We filmed for a few years. It was... I think a lot of people like looking at it didn't see the frustration. A lot of times when you're filming, for instance, you know, walk into a door or you say a sentence and you have to go back and get it just right and walk back in just right. So it was exciting a little bit, but it got a little irritating over time.
And I noticed that in your book you say the same thing, that you say that at first it was interesting and it was fun, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, I'm tired of having these cameras in my face all the time.
Yes.
One thing that I did want to ask about was actually in the book you had mentioned that everyone loved Megan. Like, you know, I don't know if you're still in contact with Megan or anything like that, but how did you feel that your and Megan's relationship, which is the other girl featured in Girlhood in the documentary, has kind of changed since then, or maybe even grown while you two were the main points of filming?
I think that I had the wrong idea about Megan for a lot of years. I felt like because we were given the same opportunities as far as therapy, as far as the people who were there, the staff members who were there to give us love and give us guidance, I felt like we should have had the same outcome. So for a long time, I was really irritated with the fact of like, why do you keep getting in trouble? Why can't you? Why can't you? Until I was older, you know, like old enough to see. But I love Megan. Megan has an amazing personality. I wish that she would have opened up a whole lot more so that we could have seen how talented she is, how much she really wanted to do with her life. Unfortunately, you know, like she did sort of follow some of the same paths as her mom, but she's doing very well now. She removed herself from Baltimore and went on down to South Carolina. We don't talk often, but she's raising her children. She has 3 children. I believe she's currently in college. She's employed and everything. She does hair there, so.
I love that for y'all.
Yes, that's my girl.
Yes. So one of the things that I'm really excited about is obviously everyone here should have seen the documentary Girlhood, but one of the things that really struck me is I'm one of those investigator types. So like I go in to look and see, you know, how someone grows, what they learn from their experience, but also how people are responding to what they're watching. And obviously, given the nature of why you were in the detention center, people have a lot of feelings about why you were there, what they think your story is. And I know when I reached out to you, you made it very clear to me that the director took a specific focus in that documentary, right? That your story never got to really get told the way you wanted it to be told. So what I want to know, to be honest, is what version of this story do you want to share? What aspects of that experience that got documented do you want to clarify for our audience that's here today, for our group of students particularly?
That's such a hard thing, just because like being from the inner city and stuff like that, you find yourself on both sides of the spectrum. For me, I made a wrong decision to be out in the streets when I was supposed to be at home. I made the wrong decision to be a runaway, to not go to school and things like that. And I found myself in a situation where I was trying to be a peacemaker so that other people wouldn't get hurt. And it was just unfortunate. You know, like we were in a situation where she was such a young girl. I was 12, or I was just turning 12, and she was, I believe, 13 years old. And all these other people that were egging us on were nearly adults. These are 18, 19, 20-year-olds that call themselves friends of hers that were egging her on. And I don't even believe it was a situation where she wanted, you know, to attack me. But I could hear them kind of egging her on to do it. And I just made the wrong decision of carrying a weapon. I tell my children now, don't carry them, because if you carry them, you may not think in that moment the consequence of using it, you know. And I didn't, you know, like I didn't think I was afraid, which isn't, I was afraid, and you know, like I grabbed this knife that I had, and unfortunately, you know, like me using that knife took her life. The narrative that went on with the documentary was pretty much that we were like friends and stuff like that. We ran in the same group. We had seen each other a time or two, but there was no real like real heavy like a friendship. Another narrative that happened a lot when the event first happened was people said that it was about a boy, or they made it seem like we were, you know, like kind of fighting and tussling over this boy, and that wasn't the case. But at the end of the day, it's tough. It's a lot tougher now at 38 than it was when I was younger, because I feel like I was in survival mode. You know, like that's why you can see me say things like, am I supposed to, you know, like beat myself up over it? Because at that time, I was under the impression that my strength was what made me special. And if I could get through this without crying, if I could get through this without feeling, then that meant that, you know, I was in some way, you know, like doing better than what I should have been doing. So
I have to say, reading the book and hearing from your words what happened versus my first introduction to you was, of course, the documentary. Mm-hmm. And the difference that a narrative makes when it's coming from your own words. I watched the documentary actually with the group last night, and I was so frustrated in this, you know, it was over a boy, or, you know, there was no context to what had happened. And I found myself just wondering, what was the context outside of just this news headline story, or, you know, this attention grabber? And I felt like in reading your book, I could feel like how afraid you were in the moment and the terror of what happened. And it kind of made me just want to reach through time and hug this young Shanae and just be like, you were a child.
For me, it's like I want to hug the both of us, because she had a story too. unfortunately, what happens a lot of times when we lose people, especially when we lose youth, we don't really tell their story in the magnitude that it should be. So yeah, it's a lot tougher when you're older than, like when you're younger, because you have it from two different spectrums. You have the people who say that you should feel bad, and then you have the people who say that you shouldn't, and finding that balance in between the two.
I think something that you said that is really sticking with me, and I think I want to explore that a little bit more, is the concept of strength, especially associated with Black women. Yes. One of the things that I find extremely difficult about existing in a space as a Black woman is the expectation that I can solve everything with my strength. That if I show emotion in any type of way, that somehow my emotion makes me less strong than everyone else. So I've been conditioned to believe to not have emotions at all. And then when I do have emotions of any kind, I'm considered more hysterical than everyone else. And so I think that hearing you talk about strength from this perspective just reminds me of a place that I sit in often, and that is, where do we create balance between like existing as a woman in a space without wearing our Blackness, but also where do we draw the line between being told that we have to be astronomically strong in every situation? How do you manage that? I mean, given your experiences, you must be carrying the world. Like that's the reality of where we are, right? Like you have to be carrying the world, or we're not carrying anything at all.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I dive a little deeper into with the book. After all of these things had taken place, I found myself at 18 years old. I was 17. I was just about to turn 18. I had been released. My mother passed away during the documentary, so she passed away 2 months after I had been released, and I found myself pregnant. And I had my oldest daughter a little over a year after my mother passed away. She was born at 24 weeks. I was a senior in high school. Yes, I was at the top of, like the list of the students, but still it was just like so much going on. And that same very thought of I have to be strong because I'm a Black woman and that's what we're taught to be, is strong, is I guess what, pushed me. And a lot of times people, I feel like over life were like, oh my gosh, look at Shanae. She's graduating at the top of our class and she has this premature baby and her mother and she went through all this stuff when she was younger and oh my gosh, she's still making it. But really it was just about the thought process that I cannot break down. I do not have the option to break down. I don't have the support system around me to be able to break down. It wasn't until I was in my early 30s and I really started to take therapy very serious that I gave myself that moment to just be like, hey, you don't have to be Superwoman right now. Whatever version of yourself you need to be. And some days that turned into that little 5 or 6 year old scared little girl. But whatever version of myself I needed to be in that moment, I gave myself permission to be that. But it took a very long time. It took until my children were old enough, until I had a stable position, I had all these other things going on before I could really address myself.
That's heavy, y'all. That's heavy. And I think many of us, from different walks of life can identify, even it doesn't matter how old you are, right? Like we all come to a point in our life where we hit a hard block, right? And then we have to reroute. We got to figure out how to reroute from hitting a hard block. But I think it's something uniquely different about hitting a hard block when you realize that the block's just going to keep staying there and having to find a way to get over them every single time, right? It's like, oh, I finally found some comfort in myself. Oops, look at the internet. Oops, I finally found out how to survive. Oops, here come another bill. Oh, I finally learned how to do this thing. Oops, I'm in a workplace where I'm not valued, right? Like, so it seems to be that every single time you get to prevail in a way, something else happens. So I guess what I'm asking about is your journey, right? Like, I think in your book you go into a really beautiful detail about how you transition, right? Like where the transition happened in your mind, where you gave yourself room to just exist. But everyone in the audience hasn't read that, so I want to know a little bit about that. What did you do? What was like the thing that said to you, it's time to get, excuse my language, my shit together? Like, I need to be able to hold my own, but I also need peace. Like, I can't just exist with my things together without having peace. What got you there?
So I think one of the biggest and most beautiful things that happened for me when I was about 20 and had my second daughter is when I started going to church with my auntie. And that was the first time that I really had faith in anything. I feel like my relationship with God like really changed a lot for me, right? So I had my children, I got married, and it was, like things were going good. But because I had not dealt with all the things that were on the inside, I blew all of that up. I used to say that I was like the 3 Hebrew boys. They came through the fire and you didn't smell, like any bit of smoke on them. And I just thought that, okay, I am fully healed. And it was like, no. You still hiding a little bit, like you have some peace, but you're hiding a little bit. So then, I got into this cycle of having myself together and then self-sabotaging and tearing it all apart and then doing it over and over again, right? And like I said, I hit those 30s. I hit that time when I was about 30, 31, and I started looking at my life and all the things that I could have. And not that I had a bad life. I've had the positions, I've had my children, I've always been pretty stable, but I looked at where I really could have gone to. Like, am I just settling for where I am now, or, can I do more for myself? And that's what it looked like for me. It looked like admitting that I needed both therapy and intensive therapy to deal with the things that I've dealt with, as well as my faith in God together. Like to be able to sit down and make a plan. I do a lot of planning. I do a lot of writing. So I will sit down and say, this is where I want to be in 5 years. This is what I need to do today. This is what I need to do within the next year. This is what I need to have accomplished at this point. And that gave me a bit of a roadmap to where I wanted to go.
In all of these, these adjectives that keep coming up, I think specifically as we talk about our experiences as Black women, it's strength, it's resilience, it's all of these things that rely on us, like Sarah said, shouldering the world. Yeah. I am so curious now that you are older, wiser, how you lean into softness. What's your favorite ways of just letting the world off your shoulders and leaning into softness? I'm a soft girl at heart, so.
Yeah. That's tough because it's like we want to, as Black women, we want to be soft, but we are so used to having to schedule things and control things. And if I don't do it this way, it won't get done. Sometimes I just have to remind myself to be quiet. Like, for instance, a few months ago, I was driving somewhere with my partner. We were going to a homegoing service, and I was looking at a way that I would have preferred to take, and he's more familiar with the area, so he had a way that he would prefer to take. Normally, that would drive me up a wall. I'm like, no, take this way because it needs to be. But what I realized in that moment is that we will get there either way. We're going to get there either way, so it may be 3 minutes shorter my time, but we're going to argue the whole way, as opposed to if I take that additional 3 minutes and take the peace. So sometimes I've learned to just sit back, trust your environment, trust the people around you that they have it, because sometimes we're literally driving ourselves crazy, even when we get to spaces and environments that we don't have to be that way because we haven't dealt with our own superwoman thing. So that's what I do. I check the superwoman sometimes,
That is, I think I needed to hear that. I don't know how to be quiet yet. I ain't at that point yet. Like, I am not at the point where I have tapped into my softness completely. I think that I wear a lot of hats and I'm so protective. And I think, when I was reading your book and watching I feel like I've watched a documentary more than hands and feet that I have, because every time I watch it, there's something new that I learn either about myself or about something that I wish you had gotten when the documentary was happening. And so when you talk about this soft life, I think about like the privileges associated with having a soft life and the things that you need for that to actually be a thing. Does everyone know what a soft life is? Have you been seeing those trends on TikTok? Do you know what we're talking about? I don't want y'all to be lost in this conversation. So the soft life is being able able to basically step out of your everyday hard shell and be able to relax, like fully embracing what it means to relax. So just so that we clear, that's what we're talking about. And so when I think about your documentary, I think about this little girl who was, some of my most annoying scenes from that documentary are when you were literally saying, people aren't seeing me.
Yes.
People aren't hearing me. And I think one of the things that I struggle with just at this point in my life is with that notion, being in a space, knowing that I can be completely invisible when I need something, and then always having to self-advocate, but being the biggest advocator for everyone else. Yes. So when it's time for somebody to step in on my behalf, because I can see the need for anyone else, I can see when someone else is hurting, I can see and empathize when someone else needs something, but I cannot and have not been in a space where people can do that for me in a way that it's like, oh, Sarah, you could take that off. And so what you're describing, this moment of like recognizing that for yourself, is so much harder than I ever expected. And I keep thinking about that young version of you where you were talking to that counselor and you like, they talking about me like I'm some hard, cold-blooded killer. But that's not me. That's not who I am. And I feel like I'm still in that space where I'm like, I cannot separate, like if I cause harm in somebody's life, I cannot forgive myself, right? I cannot move on. So I don't get to tap into that soft lifestyle because I'm always like this. I'm like, so how do you work that? How did you work through that? Like what did you do? I mean, give us the tea, because like,
on that level, it's still something that I'm working through, right? On that level, like just based off of my past, based off of, like what I've done, I'm still working through it. And I have to remind myself, because sometimes it's hard for me to go places and speak. I have people in my own family, or I have people who leave comments, and their thing is pretty much like, there are some people that are like, yes, I'm rooting for you, have a future, be successful. And then there are people who are like, how dare you be successful? And I have to fight with that on the inside of myself, because it's like, okay, do I share my story? I have so many young women, young men too, but I have so many people who come to me and say, I saw your documentary in high school and I stopped fighting every day. I saw your documentary and I went to therapy, or, like it changed me in these type of ways. So I know that out between that situation and everything else that's happened as well, it's helpful, but that's something that I have to pray for, like within myself. I just recently, a year ago, lost a young person that was very, very, very close to me. I lost my little cousin, second day of school. Someone came to the school, shot him, and killed him. I put myself in those shoes sometimes. 20 years from now, would I like to see that young man sitting on a stage, discussing what happened? But the thought process of that for me is, if it'll save other children, you know what I mean? Like, if it'll save other children, if it'll save other lives, then I'm all for it. So in that case, that's where I kind of get the comfortability to kind of like calm down and come to myself. It's still very nerve-wracking, like I still always look out into the crowd and realize that there's at least one or two people that says, I don't know why she's on this stage after what she's done, regardless of how I explain it, But there's also people who will take the information, take the stories of my life and change themselves. Maybe they'll help somebody, which takes me into my second point. The very first time I've ever felt like I was able to be in a soft era is when I met a woman by the name of Miss Mimi. And she came from Catholic Charities. She saw me speak somewhere once, and I was very young. And she stuck with me for so many years through so many things. And one day, after I had my second daughter, because all of my children were premature, I had my second daughter, and she was really upset. And she's like, I really want you to focus on life and focus on, like getting your career and everything started. But she said, what is it that you need? I had the second child. I was homeless. My first daughter, she needed oxygen tank. She had a feeding tube. She had all these monitors connected to her. I was pregnant. I'm homeless. And then I had my second daughter. Miss Mimi came and said, what is it that you need to start your life? And I told her I needed an apartment, and I needed clothes for the kids, and I needed resources for school. And within a month's time, she did all of that for me, and I never turned back from there. So grateful for that too. So I mean, I think it's just the people around you allow you to kind of relax a bit.
And from girlhood to womanhood to motherhood, I would love to talk about you being a mother, because specifically reading your story and even seeing you talk about your mother in Girlhood, the part where you said that your mother is like a limb, is like if it could just be you and your mother. Now that really resonated with me because I am a child of a single parent. My mom had my brother and I when we were relatively young, or when we were babies, but when she was relatively young. And, you know, all of these kind of things of now that I'm older, we can have these conversations about her and motherhood and not only her mother, but, you know, her mother's mother and kind of this generational, you know, healing and that kind of thing. And in being a mother now, I would love to hear more about, you know, maybe your philosophies of motherhood, or maybe how you are also, maybe your kids are also at that age right now where they're starting to reach out and want to talk, you know, about you as a mother.
So my children are 17, 18, and 20. I was determined that they were going to have a different life than I had. They were going to have a different relationship with me than I had with my parents, right? And that's not to say that my parents necessarily did anything wrong, but they did the best that they could. And it was my goal to take it a little further, just as well as I hope it's my children's goal to take it a little further and do better than I've done. I've always been open with them about my past because I had them very young. I had them at 17, 18 and 20 years old. You know, I was not healed. I had not gone to therapy. I just started having children, and I thought that that would heal me, that they would heal me. But that's not really the way. You know, like they gave me strength to keep fighting, but I still had those issues, and I needed them to know why mommy has these issues. I've given them the tools and the go-ahead to say, if I hurt your feelings, it's okay for you to say, hey, listen, you hurt my feelings. I didn't like the way you talked to me. I did not like your decision on that, and we can sit together. Now, you can't be disrespectful. I don't take disrespect. But you can have a conversation with me about the way that you feel, because I understand that I'm still growing as a person, and we're growing together, especially my oldest daughter that I had at 17. We're growing together. So yeah, I've prioritized therapy with them, and I've given them the tools for life. I pretty much allowed them to live their lives. I am a helicopter parent in the sense that I watch their location all day, every day. But, and if you are anywhere besides where you're supposed to be, please know that I am coming. But I allow them to live life too. You know, like I trust them enough that if they say, hey, I want to go to this party or I want to do this, you know, I allow them to do that. I kind of sit back and kind of take a look at what you would prefer to do, so I know if I need to tweak anything, you know, so, yeah.
So in kind of being a helicopter parent or standing out and that kind of thing, we talked about it a little earlier before we officially got started, but both in Girlhood and both in your book, you talk about sex, you talk about sexuality, you openly talk about having girlfriends and these experiences, and I think it's really important to mention, even in your introduction, some of which were more predatory than anything. As a mother now, how do you navigate? Because we've got an audience full of young adults who are all of the freedom in the world, as regardless of if they like to think they have freedom or not. Right. You know, are free here to explore their sexuality, to be sometimes sexual delinquents that we have to get onto, and that kind of thing. And some of them are the age of your kids, and so I guess what I'm asking is, how have you navigated talking about sex, sexuality, and these kind of adult themes with your own children or with young adults after going through what you've gone through?
For us, it's always playful. Like, you know, like it's always playful. We have that type of relationship where it's like, hey, you using condoms? You know, like we have that type of a thing. But you know, I don't know, like, so for the majority of my life, I identified as bisexual. Now, currently, I identify as straight. You know, like, that's just going to be what it is for me. And I hid that from my children for a lot of years because what I did not want was for them to mimic me. I wanted them to choose their own sexuality based off of their experiences and not based off of what they saw, right? And then my daughter came to me when she was in 6th grade, and she's like all like shaky. And I'm like, what's wrong with you? And she's like, I think there's a girl in my class that I like. And I'm like, okay. So like, you know, like my biggest thing with them is to be safe. Whether it's a man or a woman, you know, respect yourself, make sure that others respect you, and that's it for me. You know, like that is your life, that is your sexuality, that's what you choose to do with yourself. That has nothing to do with me. And it's always funny when parents think that they have the ability to make their children gay or straight. Like, you do not. You have the ability to determine whether or not they will hide it from you, but you do not have the ability to determine their sexuality. So.
And I think your mother said something similar. You said in the book where you had said, at least towards the end, that she was like, well, I guess as long as you're happy, because you wanted to introduce one of your girlfriends to her.
Yes, my parents were not having it. Like, my mom was like, if you say it again, I'm gonna get your dad to spank you. And I'm like, look, you know, like it's nothing that you can do about that. It was like I came on to them continuously, even before then, like from a very, very, very young. I came on to them maybe 4 or 5 times, and each time it was like they were hearing it for the first time. So they were as equally upset. But yeah, towards, like, you know, when my mom was about to pass away, she was like, okay, you know, like, I realized that this is what you're choosing for yourself, and if you know, like, you're happy, then I'm happy for you. Even with my dad, I thought my dad would never come around, but years ago I was and you know, like, I was gonna marry my ex-fiance, and my dad, he was, you know, he's like, oh, okay, well, you know, it is what it is. So I appreciate them. And my granddad has always been super, super, super supportive. He's another person that's just like, hey, if you are happy, I'm happy for you.
So a little bit of a pivot into, unless, do you have a question? Okay.
I have questions. So one of the things I want to go back to is the part about therapy, right? So obviously, looking into the audience, you know, we have quite a few students of color and young students just in general here. One of the things I want to ask you about is your process with therapy. I think, like, in Black and brown communities, it is not often that we sit around and we have conversations about therapy, right? Like, in our communities, for many of us, we still come from families where this conversation is completely taboo. I ain't having that conversation. We not talking about that. And many of us are fighting against that, right? Like, we are actively having conversations saying therapy is not this, like, dangerous thing, right? Like, it's not a bad thing to want to be in a better place for yourself, right? So can you give some advice to some of our young people who might be sitting out in the audience, who might have family like that, who are not supportive of that journey? What can they do to kind of protect themselves in that? But also, like, what are some insights that they could, you know, be doing for themselves in the meantime?
Right. Now, one of the first things that I will tell you that I tell all people now, we were just talking about this earlier about having children. Sometimes we don't take having children as seriously as we should. We should definitely know our mental health status and diagnosis and our family's history of mental health diagnosis before we have children with other people, because, you know, if it's you and your partner, you know, y'all have a child, you might end up with all types of things. But however, outside of that, I don't know, therapy is amazing. Therapy is amazing. I've had my children in therapy almost their whole entire life. And it makes everything a lot easier. A lot of things that you feel like you can't tell anyone else, you can tell your therapist. There's a lot of things we carry into our 20s and 30s that we really don't have to, that can be tackled, you know, if we got that therapy when we're younger. Especially, like you said, in Black and brown communities, it's not something that's always as socially accepted, but sometimes social acceptance isn't that big of a thing anyway. You can let people, you know, be mentally ill on their own and not get taken care of while you know, like, take care of yourself. So definitely go for that therapy. It's the most important thing.
Also, if you are seeking therapy at Simon's Rock and you're a little concerned about how to do that, please do not hesitate to reach out to our wellness center. We do have therapists in the wellness center, but also if you are just like, Sarah, what therapist do you go to? I need some help. I am more than happy to have that conversation with you about that. I want all of you all to be in a healthy space. I realize that at your age, it could be very daunting to have that conversation or to even acknowledge that you need support. And I think Shanae is hitting on that very hard here, is that like the moment you feel like something is out of control, it's probably been out of control. The moment you start feeling like you are having a panic attack or freaking out about something, you were probably already doing that long ago, right? So if you are in a position where you recognize that, it's time to get some help. It is not a sign of weakness. It is an immense sign of strength to be able to say, I need some support. I need some help. What the hell do I do? Okay.
And we live in a day and time where because of social media, you guys have access to information right at your fingertips. Like back in my day, we had to like go and find someone who had a computer. Like we didn't have as much information that's readily available. So I know a lot of times being on TikTok and Instagram and everybody's so social media famous, it deals with, like your self-esteem. I've seen a rise. I feel like we're having a rise for younger people as it comes to like suicide awareness and things like that. So yes, definitely do your check-ins. I like to tell my children, even if you don't have to go on a regular basis, go at least once a year for your evaluation. Let the therapist tell you that you don't need to be there. So there's that too.
You will always hear Sarah and I being like, oh, gotta go. Like we've got scheduled therapy, yeah. Things like that, because we both think that it's so important and both absolutely are therapy advocates. So thank you for that so much. Okay, so one of my favorite scenes in Girlhood actually is in the beginning, and it's when y'all are gathered around, for lack of a better term, shaking ass to juveniles.
Back that thing up.
Back that thing up. That's the Christian version. Back that ass up. And so this is my favorite question to ask speakers and things is, from there to now, what are you listening to these days? What you shaking ass to these days? Backing that thing up to these days?
So I've just had a recent change in life. So it's more of a Thai tribute, more of a gospel on my playlist.
She said, "Take me to the King."
However.
I grew up in the church, okay?
However, outside of that, like, I don't know, like, I'm old, but I'm still, like, drill music.
Oh, yeah?
I'm still, like, Lil Durk and Pooh Shiesty. Like, I'm too old for it. I listen to them by myself, but stuff, yeah.
Are there any newer artists you are enjoying lately?
Oh, I feel like I work too much. I like SZA and Summer Walker. Okay. Yeah. I'm from Baltimore, so anything that Krishan comes out with, I'll listen to. But my favorite is like Jay-Z. Okay. Love Jay-Z. Kendrick Lamar. So. Let me find out I done went and got this dress for nothing. I could have came here and had my tension and stuff on. Trying to be professional.
I was like, Monk, actually, can we get juveniles back there?
Come out too.
You say they just have one of their dances. I'll have a little twerk fest. It's okay.
Gotcha.
That's what you think. Okay. Do you yes. Don't want to hog the mic.
No, it's okay. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is like I love hearing transitions, right? Like I love knowing how somebody got from point A to point B. And earlier today, I want to bring this up because I think it's super relevant to think about just like existing in a space. Yeah. We talked about the workplace, right? So if y'all don't know, what you probably don't know because y'all ain't her friend on Facebook like I am. She works for JP Morgan Chase.
I do.
And one one of the things that we talked about at the lunch table that I think is super relevant to this conversation, and you already kind of brought up that work life, is like this balance of being who you are in this workplace. Yes. And so one of the things that I wanted to know is, as you have gone through this transition of like self-discovery, therapy, like loving on your kids, loving on your partner, and finding peace in all these different places, how do you show up to the workplace? How do you bring some of that to the workplace with you? And I think that's where I want to stop, because I can go on about that.
So, in my workplace, I just show up as me. I'm never that person that's like trying too hard to prove anything. I prefer to show up as me, give myself 100%, do my work, and I believe the opportunities will find me. Most chances, most times they do. But yeah, I believe in showing up as myself, whether that be this way or whether that be with my red locks. Just show up as me. And if there's a problem, if I feel like there is someone who steps out of line of those boundaries, I'm never in a place where I'm afraid to speak up for myself. I think that's most important, not being afraid to lose opportunities to speak up for myself. I think we may have had a question back here.
Oh, yes, Ms. Leori.
Yes, I do. I do. I do. Even with us coming here today, I'm looking at the website and I'm looking at the TikToks and I'm like, okay, y'all, we not in the city, we not in Baltimore, we have to go in here and act like we got some sense, so you feel like you can be, I'm always myself, but people say, that my voice changes, or that the way that I talk change. And it's so natural to me now because I've been doing it for so long, between engagements and between going to work and stuff like that. But yeah, that code switching is definitely a thing where it's I even got my hair done for my graduation because I'm I want my JP Morgan picture to look like XYZ, and it's red locks under here, so yeah, that code switching is definitely a thing. I wish that we had more spaces where we felt free to just be, who we are as people, as women of color. So, yeah. Thank you.
Is everyone familiar with what the word code switching is? Period. Okay. Thank you. In a nutshell, code switching is the switch of language or behavior or general sense of self in different places, predominantly when people of color are in spaces that are not with other people of color. So for example, I call it my white voice when I'm on the phone with people and I don't know who it is. So if you call me and I answer the phone and it's not a number that I recognize, I might do something like this. Yes, hello. And they're like, this is so-and-so. This is Sarah speaking. Because I feel like that's what I have to do to be safe in that space. Another example of code switching happens via email. Being very intentional about how I say things and racking my brain 1,000,000 times over how I'm presenting myself in an email or even a text message. What am I saying and how is that going to be perceived? Or even when I'm stepping into a space, right? Yeah. That's the biggest one. I think is probably the most daunting, is to step in a space and know that one out of however many people in there, it's 1 in 3 usually have a stereotype for Black women, right? Knowing that in a room, I'm already perceived a certain way before I open my mouth. And knowing that I have an unfair burden of being prepared to explain myself over and over and over again, no matter how much sense I'm making, or being worried and uncomfortable to the point where I feel like I can't say anything at all because the space was not safe for me. So I think that that's something, that's difficult. And I think that you have an additional burden that's associated with that, right? Like you don't get to, I can hide in my profession, right? I can hide and be like, oh, I'm Dr. Liddell, right? But in a world that don't care about Black women's success, I don't get that. But in addition to that, when you type your name in on Google, when you look at the picture or click on the documentary, you have this other thing that is associated with your identity, right? So like your code switching feels even more personal, right? Because you are carrying this like additional unfair burden of people's perceptions alongside of those stereotypes. How do you work through that? Like when you come into a space, what are you doing mentally, right? Because like even before you got here, I know we went through the rundown. Like you're like, what am I gonna wear? What type of students are there? How old are they? Right? Like all these things that for some people they don't even think about. They just show up. So how do you work through that? What are your processes? Like if you could name 3 things that you do to prepare yourself to be in spaces, especially unfamiliar ones, what would you say you do? I think
professionally, I like to go in as quick as possible and kind of tell my story because it lingers, right? Again, because like you said, all you have to do is Google my name. And I'm very proud of the fact that I'm an author. I'm very proud of the fact that God has blessed me with the testimony that I get to, travel and speak about this, right? And I understand that somebody, some coworker, some colleague is going to say, well, what is this she's talking about? She's an author. Let me Google this real quick, right? And no, I have not been in trouble since that day. Since I was 12, I have not had any legal issues. I have not been arrested, which is the reason why I get to do all the things that I get to do because I don't have an adult record. It was the juvenile record, so it was sealed, right? But I still go into places even knowing that, even though that I'm clean, I feel like I need to tell you where I came from before somebody else comes and tell you, right? So years ago, I worked at SunTrust Bank, and I was a teller. I was on the front end. I was finishing up my training, and a few days before that, I had done a speaking engagement for Catholic Charities, and someone saw me on the news. And then they come into the bank, and I'm their teller. So, of course, they report me to HR because what are you doing with this young lady in here? And I just saw her on the news, say that she's done this, that, and the other. So I think for me, like, once I get my foot in the door, that's one of the first things I normally do. I'll pull my supervisor or someone up to the side and say, hey, listen, this is the backstory, just in case anybody, give you that. And then I don't... That's pretty much it. Like from there, I just do my work. People normally look at it and they're like, okay, given that background, then they start saying stuff like, oh, I want you to share your story. I'm like, no, it's not in my pay grade for this, so yeah.
I can only imagine how exhausting that would be constantly to have people basically asking you to trauma dump your life, because it's so forward, it's so around that they expect you to basically be available for them at any day, time, anything, just to be able to, stand on a pulpit, stand on your box and tell your story.
Yeah, especially at work. And I mean, it's received different ways in different places, like I'm sure you guys have seen some of the articles. It could be different, sometimes it'll be a really good outcome. Most times it is. I would say I've had 99% positive feedback, but there's always that 1%. So yeah.
I would actually love to talk about those articles are just kind of the power of a narrative. And in the sense that when Girlhood came out, that was the narrative, right. Or what you saw in the papers, which was, again, like I mentioned before, these kind of, it's meant to get people clicking on the articles. It's meant to get, eyes on pages. So how do you feel that the narrative may have changed over the years, and how do you hope that it changes in the future?
So that's why Girlhood to Womanhood was very, very important for me. What happened was that Girlhood came out, and no disrespect to the makers of Girlhood or anyone else, who stepped in, but we went through a long period of time of people saying, I believe in your story, I want to get your story out here, I wanted this, that. People made thousands, if not millions of dollars off of us. That was another really big misconception about the documentary. People are like, oh, I didn't make a penny. I've never made a penny, from the proceeds of that documentary, right? But we had people that were coming out of woodworks, like to speak here, to speak there, to go on this show, to go on that show. And it was really, for the most part, for their betterment. So I'm sorry, what was your question?
I guess just talking about, I don't know, narratives and even now in social media, you see everyone's got their own story or own way of things. And it's kind of like, if a narrative takes off, people run with it.
Yeah, that's why the book was most important for me. Because I feel like a lot of people told my story. A lot of people profited from my story besides me. And yeah, I didn't want to go with a narrative. I wanted it to be from my own words, everything that happened from the beginning to the end. Like even the relationship that I had with my parents, the way that it showed in the documentary was a lot different from what it was in life. Like we really didn't have as many opportunities. Like I feel like my mom should have had a lot more help when it came to like child care, accessibility in our neighborhood and things like that. So yeah, the narrative is mine now because I've written it in my own words.
Period. And that is why we're encouraging you all to pick up a copy of the book. Yeah. It's very important.
Yeah, because it goes, girlhood, there's a lot between girlhood and womanhood. We go over a lot that was happening during that time, and then just the way that I've been able to navigate from then until now, because it takes a lot to go from a young lady who has been pregnant, addicted to alcohol, running the streets, and then arrested by the age of 12 to sitting on a stage right here. It takes a lot, and there were a lot of different things that happened even after that, from my mom passing away to me having children, to just everyday life. You still, as a woman, you deal with relationships, you deal with your home life. It's a lot. So my book is my baby.
And I also encourage students to read it simply because I've read it, Sarah's read it, we've watched Girlhood, and I think there are different parts of your story that resonate with both of us, and the fact that in different ways we had similar upbringings and being low income and having to deal with all of these things that we were way too young to have to deal with. And truthfully, there might be some people out in the audience that have experienced that, and there probably is a good chunk that haven't.
Yeah. And another thing about it is never discount anyone's story, right? There were a lot of people when it came to my parents that were like, oh, that could never happen to my kid and this, that, and the other. I've never really had to struggle financially. Now, yes, we lived in the projects. That sounds like a struggle, but I can't think of a day that I went without a meal, or I've never not had cable. I've never not had a phone or a cell phone or computer in my house. I didn't grow up with like drug addicted parents that weren't there for me. I grew up with hardworking parents. My mother literally worked 2 jobs so that she could provide for me. This was literally a situation, for the most part, that started because there was not enough, there wasn't enough supervision, right? So this isn't one of those stories where it's like, oh, this could never happen to my child, or it could never be, like this person and that person. No, you'd be surprised what children can get into and what they can turn out to do when they do not have the proper supervision. And that's whether you're in the projects or in a mansion. So, don't discount the story because you haven't necessarily heard something that, pertains to you. Just there's a lot there.
And you know what? That's the part of your story that resonated with me the most. Yeah. So a little backstory. I watched the documentary Girlhood, I think 8 years ago, and I tested my luck and reached out to Shanae on Facebook. I'm like, man, I hope she will respond, because I got a lot to say about what this documentary did for me. And she did respond. I was so happy. And she befriended me. So that was really nice. I get to watch her from a distance. But one of the things that has sat with me, and one of the things that continues to sit with me, is when you talk about resources and supervision. Yes. It made me reflect on my own childhood growing up and the childhood that I know so many other people share is that emotional intelligence of like having parents who kind of anticipate your needs. So like in my family, we were all about education. Everything in my household was about go to school, go to school, go to school. But there were no other conversations about what it meant to exist in school. How was I actually going to survive when I got there? Or like conversations around what it meant to like be an adult, and it was just expected that you knew, and so when you were expected to just know, you went off and did adult things, right? So you got exposed to adulthood at a very young age. I remember having sex for the first time and being like, oh, okay. Yep. That's what they've been talking about. Cool. I remember having my first experience like being alone someplace and not knowing what to do and being like, oh, this is what they meant. Like nobody told me what this was. And you just have to figure it out. And then we get to this place where it's like figuring it out then got me into all this mess. Like I didn't figure so much stuff out that I ain't figure shit out at all. And I'm in this bad situation, right? So I think so many of us, even our students here, like it don't matter what age you are, it is so easy to find yourself in a situation where you don't have the answers, like where you are just struggling because people don't anticipate that need. And I feel like in our communities that happens so much. Like I remember telling my sister like, oh, Edie, your credit is in a good place. You should try to put your daughter on a line of credit so she can like build up a credit history. She's like, what do I need to do that for? No one did that for us. And I was like, that's true. But I'm telling you something new now. Like I'm preparing you for something different now. And so like I think about that when I read your work, right? I think about how those conversations feel so strange and far and distant because so many of us depend on not dependent on people. Like it's just embedded in our culture, like build it from the mud, like get it from the dirt. And like if you get it from the dirt, you done did better than everybody else. But I don't believe in that. And you don't believe in that in your work either. You like, hell no. If I could get some help, give it, talk about that.
And I encourage that with my children. I am not you're 18, it's time to get out type of a person. You don't have to get it out the mud, or them, you don't have to get it out the mud because I'm getting it out the mud for you. And hopefully you could just pick up on, like what I'm doing and get it from there. Like my daughter being about to be 21, one of her biggest thing is, my friends have apartments, I need to get an apartment. I'm like, you are young, you are single, you don't have a family, you don't have any children, and you have a good job. Girl, go get you a mortgage or something, get you a little condo or something or stay home for a bit, until things die down. But yeah, like I do not encourage that with them. We all need somebody, and a lot of times that being in a space of wanting to be grown way too quickly, wanting to run out into the streets and do whatever you want to do. So you get an apartment, you go and you sign for a car, those types of things. You find yourself in a hole that you really don't have to be. And then when you're in your 30s and you're looking to really settle down and get your life together, you have to dig yourself back up out of this hole. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. Just take your time. It's no rush. You'll look up one day and you'll be old. And you'll wish you had this time back again. It's no rush.
We have a question from the audience. Yes. Leori, you had a question?
No, I just was going to make a comment.
Thank you. And the beautiful thing about this is that there's a seed that's being planted, right? And it may not go much of anywhere today, right? But what I like to do, especially when I'm speaking to teenagers or younger people, I realize that it's not going to touch everybody right away. You're going to have a few that it's going to touch. You're going to have a few that's going to reach out on Facebook or TikTok or Instagram, because I'm on there too. I understand that Facebook for old people. But it's going to be a few of you a year from now or 2 years from now where something comes up and you think about today. It's going to be a few, of you that maybe 4 or 5 years from now, something that I said today will bud up in your spirit. And that is the biggest thing for me. There's a lot of lessons that people tried to teach me when I was younger, a lot of talks that I really didn't listen to, but I listened to. And then I got older and it was like, oh my gosh, this is right on time because I remember when. So it has been my honor to be here. It has.
And we have absolutely loved having you. And so now we would love if any of our students or anybody attending has any questions for Miss Shanae. Yes. Go ahead.
I love you too. I would say keep doing what you're doing. There is a lot of bad influences in this world. There's a lot of people who aren't necessarily on the right track that will try to advise you to party all the time or do this or do that. Stay on the track that you're on. You have the rest of your life. I was told once that we work hard while we're young so that we can party or we can relax when we're older. So if you're on the right track, that's the best place for you to be.
We have any more questions?
Right here.
Oh, raise them hands high. Oh, we got one back here.
So I think the first part for me is that I am absolutely positively relentless. In my mind, if I say it's getting done, it is getting done. I may have to change the date. You know, like I've been on this home ownership thing. I've been trying to do this since I was about 25. So I may have to change the date. I may have to change my direction, but I know, you know, like for a certain fact, when it comes to my goals, I'm like, I'm getting this done. So it never really dawned on me like this may not happen. Like every now and then, because I do get kind of down on myself. It's hard not to. So every now and then it's just like, you've been working on the same thing, or, you know, like I might look at my list of goals and it's like, girl, can you really do this? But then I have to remind myself, those are those moments where I remind myself everything that I've been through. Those are those moments where I might, you know, turn on Jay-Z or Diddy or, you know, a good motivational speech where I pray. Yeah, so that's the biggest thing, just being relentless. There's always an obstacle. There will always be an obstacle. There's always something to doubt. There's always, you know, like somebody who was supposed to come through or didn't come through, you know, like those types of things. But being able to pivot is a big thing too. I know when to pivot. I know when to take my eyes off of this one thing, even though it's still my goal. I know when to take my eyes off of this and focus on this so I can get this done first and then I can go to the second thing. So yeah, I would say that relentlessness, writing your goals down, make sure you can see them. I went through a whole time where I would write my goals on a sticky note. I want to save $100,000. You know, I want my children to have good health. I want to live until I'm 90. I want to do this. I would write them on a sticky note and put them on my mirror. So that's the very first thing that I see every day so that I know that I stay focused. I'll write it down in my phone, take a screenshot, and make it as my screensaver. So I know I'm going to touch my phone a couple of times today. That's going to be my focus. I have to remember that. And then as it comes to like relying on people, I got to a point where I realized I had to rely on God. Because sometimes it changes, like you said, with people. You know, like today, it could be like you have your closest friends. You got your close friend, y'all are here together, y'all in classes, and then he or she decides to go home. Your goal still got to be the same. You can't rely on, you know, like the person that's next to you. You have to rely on yourself, your faith, your higher power, and what you want for you. Thank you. I never really felt resentful or angry with God. There was a time where I felt like I was cursed. When I lost my very first friend, her name was Shaquan. She was in the documentary. She had been with a friend. We don't know, I don't think anybody knows why to this day, but he stabbed her and he took her baby. She passed away. She was about 18 when it happened. I remember sitting at her funeral feeling like God was punishing me, and he would probably keep punishing me, you know, for a long time because of what I had done. But God doesn't work that way, and I had to learn that for myself. But no, I've always felt like when things fall apart for me, and I've had lots of things fall apart. I mean, I've had lots of days where I'm just like, balled up in a corner, and it's like, God, I just want to make it so much. It's about my perception. So even on the bad days, even when things fall apart, I have an understanding that if this fell apart, it's because God is about to do something better for me. So I never have the ability to get, you know, like mad at God now or like feel like he's punishing me for anything, because I know that everything works together for my good at the end of the day.
There was this imagery in the book that you described of a slug, of focusing on a slug when there's a heart, when it was you had gone outside, you were, I believe you were getting reprimanded for something,
yes.
And there was a
something
slug.
else I don't believe in.
So there was a slug outside, and then you found yourself focusing on the slug, and then someone came around and poured salt on the slug, and you'd said you saw a lot of yourself as that kind of slug.
Yeah, I did, like, for a lot of years, you know, like for a lot of years, because I didn't have the best relationship. My mother was gone. I didn't have the best relationship, you know, like with my family, because it was always hard for me to trust people. It was hard for me to trust that you would do, you know, like the right thing by me, or it was hard for me to even believe that people cared that much, right? So I stayed a lot to myself. But yeah, I went through that for a long time. I had a hard time really connecting with people until I had my children. And eventually, over time with therapy, that's getting a lot better. I joined a book club recently, and I'm very, yeah, I'm excited about that.
I think that's one of the most beautiful things that I like to see from your story, is that coming from this place where you were dismissing everything, right? It was like, stay away from me, leave me alone, like I can't deal with that, to being this person that's like, I want to receive that, I deserve that, like these things are mine. Like I had this moment recently, like I was talking to my partner, and I like had to come to terms with like that I loved somebody. And like when I was reading your book, you had this moment where you realized like you loved somebody, including yourself, and just like coming to the terms with like being so resentful, like, and that question that I can't remember who asked that about resentment, when you said that you had not felt that, I was sitting over here like, absolutely I did. I remember telling God, I ain't gonna believe in you no more. You keep not showing up on my behalf. And then like being in this place where I realized that my love was also gone. Like my love for myself was gone in that moment too. And I couldn't look at myself. I went years without a mirror in my house because I didn't want to get dressed and have to see myself. And so to see you in this book become this person that was like, I deserve something. I saw myself in that moment. I saw myself the moment I looked at my partner and was like, wow, this person brings out this soft place in me that I didn't think that I could have because I didn't think that I deserve it. And then to see you in this book say, I'm in this place where I'm no longer trying to figure out if something belongs to me. I'm figuring out that things do belong to me. me, and it's okay to deserve those things. That is so beautiful, and I wish that for everybody. Like, everybody deserves to get to a place where they're not questioning whether or not something belongs to them, but they understand that they deserve to have that thing. Like, you deserve to have like happiness and joy and peace. And when you describe yourself to a slug, I'm like, slugs live in life a whole different type of way, you know. Like, literally live a different type of way. But I thought, what a beautiful thing to see yourself in this way, to see yourself grow from this thing in a way that no one else could have paid for you, no one else could have designed it that way, but you like took control and you were like, no, that's mine. Like, I'm having that. And like, that is so powerful.
And I had to do that with the book. Like, years ago, and this book has been years in making, right? Years ago, I had someone who was going to help me with the book. And in exchange for the fact that I didn't have money to pay, it was like, oh, you get a percent and this, that, and the other, right? They didn't necessarily like a different decision that I made that had nothing to do with the book. And so they were just like, well, I'm not going to help you no more. And it sat there for a year, and I had written the whole book out, you know, like it was, and everybody kept saying, when is your book coming? When is your book coming? And I was like, I don't want to do it anymore. I don't want to do it anymore. And then one day I was just like, no. You know, like, this is my story. I'm tired of giving people that much power over me and over my story. And it was like giving birth. Like, I wish I could share with you guys the picture of me, like, during the time that I was editing and writing. I just looked absolutely crazy. My hair was everywhere. I was just, like, sitting there with my silk robe just looking crazy. And I would cry and cry and cry because as I'm writing through these things and editing these things, some of these things are coming to my, you know, like coming to the recent, you know, like memory again. It's in my head again. It's like, I forgot that this happened, right? And my partner would come home and he's just like, has to like console me and get me together. Like, that's why the book is also dedicated to him. But this went on for like a month or two. But yeah, I am so very proud of this piece of work. And if you get a chance to read it, for those who will have the book, it was very important to me that it was authentic. So you will see it's not edited all the way. It's not like fancy. It's not, but it's my words. And I wanted it to be designed or kind of similar to that book Push by Sapphire. So Sapphire wrote that book years and years ago. It's a little different because I don't think Sapphire could really read or anything like that. Like, so it was a lot of misspelled things. But yeah, so it's authentic. It's my words. You can tell that it's my words. It's not something that someone came together with me to help me get fancy. That was very important to me because it was like my first very big girl thing for my story.
I felt while reading it that we were sitting together maybe in a coffee shop, or maybe, you know, we had just got done watching the newest episode of Scandal and we're like drinking wine and talking about life or something like that, which I think is just such a beautiful way to write and to experience your writing.
Yeah, thank you.
We want to ask the audience if they have any more questions for Shanae. Does anyone have any final questions for Shanae? No? Going once?
There we go.
Oh,
right here.
there we go.
So when I was arrested, like I said, I was 12. I had just turned 12 a month before. I was in 6th grade, but I had dropped out in 6th grade because I was determined I wasn't going to go to school anymore. I was going to be a runaway. When I came back home, I was in the 11th grade, and my mom had passed away like the 2 weeks before that. And I think for me, I just wanted normalcy. I felt like I hadn't had a normal life for so long between, you know, like being arrested and, you know, like having the cameras and everything follow me. I wanted normalcy, so that's why you don't see any footage of me at school or anything like that. Of course they wanted to, but I was like, no, I just want a normal life. I remember really looking forward to maybe being a cheerleader and dating somebody on the football team and going to prom and all that stuff. Yeah. Yeah, so it was just like, I think I was still in survival mode, which is why I didn't have much, like trouble adjusting. It wasn't until I got a little older that I realized, like, hey, like maybe this is a bit of an issue. Like now, I can't be locked into a room. Is those type of things, like I'm claustrophobic now where I wasn't claustrophobic before. So it's those types of things. But outside of that, I think I just wanted normalcy. I wanted what I saw on television. I wanted what everyone else had. And I didn't necessarily get that all the way, but I did get my one prom, and that was beautiful. Thank you for that.
Any final thoughts, questions?
And I am open, so you guys don't have to be afraid if you have a question. Like I won't be upset about your question.
Going once, going twice. Okay. Okay.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. So it really was, well, at least for me, it really was that loving of an experience. The staff members are still a part of my life to this day. So it really was that way. It wasn't the same for the boys, I will say that. They didn't, looking at a lot of their cottages and the way they were treated, they didn't have the same privileges or the same love given to them that we did. But as far as trying them as juveniles, we are in a very tough place in our city right now. Where it's so for instance, me, right? If they had given me leniency and they had said, hey, well, listen, we're going to slap her on the wrist, or had I really told them what was happening and they realized that, okay, maybe this isn't a first degree or second degree murder thing, maybe it's this, and I had been out in a year, I would have reoffended. The thing that saved me was that my parents and that judge were not lenient, that they were, they wanted to hold me accountable for what I had done regardless of what the story was, right? But that's not the case for everybody. I definitely think that in some of these situations, especially something small or minor, misdemeanors and things like that, that these young people shouldn't be going into the adult prison system. And the biggest thing about that is, just like you said, there's a little bit of a chance to rehabilitate them when they're in juvenile detention centers, because there is more more services being offered. A lot of times when you send these kids to an adult prison, there's no service, there's no way to rehabilitate them. All you do is put them in a status where they get to connect with other people, older people, in these criminal enterprises, and they may come out a whole lot worse than they went in. So yeah, I definitely understand that. That's a tough thing. But in Baltimore, we're going through a really tough time where they're trying to understand whether or not they should charge these children as juveniles or adults. And that's honestly something I just don't know. I pray on. You're welcome.
Final thoughts? I'm going to count down one last time. Going once, going twice. 3 times. Well, thank you so much, Shanae, for being in this space with us. Thank you so much for being vulnerable and open to the conversation that we're having here and that we will continue to have in our community. And thank you all for being here and allowing 3 Black women to sit on this stage, to talk about our experiences, to share this moment with Shanae, and to just exist here in this way. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here.
And for thank you. For those of you who have a book already or who wants to purchase one, I will be, like outside the door there. I'll do autographs as well, or if you have questions that sometimes people have questions that they want to ask on their own too.
And a slight reminder that this is the end of Symposium Week, but collective activism does not end here. It's not just a week in the year. It's not just Pride Week or anything like that. Collective activism, social justice is a lifestyle that I all hope that you commit to. Yes. Thank you.